asking, Lord, that you would assist us in that. We know that you are. We know that you open many doors and you close many doors. So just guide and direct us any way possible that we might accomplish your will in this world. Bless all those who are worshiping you today, and may we receive that blessing that you have stored up for us. And we ask it in Jesus' wonderful, miracle-working name. Amen and amen.
Amen.
Hey, good morning, Ken. Good to see you.
Just wondering if he's still like that.
Okay, well, as always, one of the things that we like to do is encourage people that this is something that you can do at your own home. We think the time will come shortly when this is really where it'll go. To go back to the first century model, where they would come together in homes and share their experiences and share things that they've been learning. And so we're kind of ahead of the curve here as to where we know things are going to head, where they're going to go. It's nice to maybe go to a large congregation at times and sit back and enjoy a service, but when it comes to really learning and sharing and growing, we think that this format is, of course, more conducive for that. So anyway, we want to encourage you to take the step out and do what you can to, in your own neighborhood, your own community, offer something like this to your friends and neighbors. And as always, we want to start with our story that hopefully will inspire you as it does us. So Rose, go ahead and take it away.
When we left off last week, he was going to a meeting for people that were engaging in demonic worship and spirits. He says that they began to give kind of like a testimony meeting at the beginning. He says after each one of these success stories, the individual would always give praise or credit to a particular spirit by name, and many times referred to the spirit as Lord of his life. In the short time I was involved with demon worshippers, my observations were that in their testimonies of how spirits had worked for them, they often referred to the demon spirit as Lord God. For instance, one would say, "It was wonderful to see Lord God Beelzebub's power exhibited on my behalf on such and such a day." That seems so weird to think about.
Yeah.
Or someone would ask, "Sam, how have you been since I last saw you?" The reply would be, "Real fine, thank you. The gods have really benefited my life in wonderful ways."
A little more than saying Maranatha, right?
Yeah.
It's the way they used to greet one another in the Old Testament.
Those observations were to help me later on as I studied the Word of God to understand the true nature of the great conflict between the forces of good and evil, and in making a decision for Christ. That evening, one individual impressed me greatly. He was a medical doctor. The physician told about the spirits giving him hypnotic abilities and healing powers, including the ability to take away pain and stop severe wounds and cuts from bleeding. After recounting some very fascinating accounts of his healing people in his practice of medicine, he excused himself to go down to the worship room by saying, "Will you friends please excuse me? I need to go and perform acts of devotion, so to be regenerated by Lord God Nehushtan. I depend on his vivifying power to revive and heal my patients." Sounds like they give more credit to the demons than we do to God in our Christian walk sometimes. The meeting was in progress about an hour when a latecomer arrived. He was greeted by a number of people referring to him as Charmer. "Hey there, Charmer. How are you, Charmer? How have you been?" So on. As we were driving back home that evening, I asked George about him. "What about that dignified-looking gentleman who came in late? Some addressed him as Charmer. Does his name have a particular significance?" "It has great significance, but I can't tell you about him now. After you have attended a few of our meetings and you become part of the group, remind me to tell you about him. He's a fascinating individual. In fact, he is believed among us to be the greatest charmer or hypnotist that has ever walked the sidewalks of Montreal. By the way, fellows, I was delighted to see how everyone this evening took to you guys. It made me feel good to see that. Understand this, we are a closely knit group. In fact, I had a hard time getting permission to bring you with me to this meeting. At first I was refused the privilege, and then through a working of a spirit counselor appearing to our leader on vacation in the USA, I received a phone call giving me the okay, and the way was open for you to associate with us and eventually become members of our society. I'll tell you more about it sometime in the future. I felt somewhat uncomfortable as I heard George talking about me, with plans projecting a certainty that I was going to become one of them as a demon worshiper. But Roland was overjoyed about the whole thing. "After a few visits," said George, "I'll have you come downstairs to see our worship room. I think you'll find it quite impressive. However, it will not be possible for you to visit the worship room of the gods until the satanic priest is present, and only after receiving the approval of the spirits." Now think about that. Look at all they go through to let somebody be part of their group. That became a reality 3 weeks later. At this moment, I think an explanation is necessary concerning the house of worship. This account took place in a private home, a luxurious residence in Montreal, Canada. That evening, as we were visiting on the main floor, we could hear faintly, coming from the basement level, a sound that closely resembled the type of music and chanting used by the people of India in their devotions. Every so often, some of the people would leave and go downstairs and return about 30 minutes or so later. All that activity prompted George to lean toward me as we sat on a sofa, saying softly, "Our worship room is downstairs. I'll tell you about it after we leave this evening." About the charmer, it must have been about 6 weeks after we had met him, that one evening, as we were returning home, I asked George if he felt like telling us about him. "Oh, yes," was his response. "You fellows should hear about this fascinating individual. But first I would like to bring your attention to the fact that we are, generally speaking, a law-abiding group of citizens. I don't know any one of us who wouldn't give the shirt off his back to help someone, and we never really take advantage of people with the powers that are passed on to us by the spirits. But in the case of the charmer, well,
That's
he
a
is
big
somewhat
lie.
different from the rest of us. It appears that he has a weakness in his character, and because of it, he has employed his great hypnotic power or gift in a way he should not have done. I should say he lost his sense of direction for a little while. He is a very sharp businessman, owns 2 nightclubs, and has been doing exceedingly well. And as I've said before, he is a powerful hypnotist. He can place a person under his spell or hypnotic trance in less than 10 seconds if he or she agrees to look him straight in the eyes and relax their mental activities for a few seconds. In other words, quit thinking about anything for a short while. Having 2 nightclubs, he has a lot to do with show business people that come and go. Most groups stay for an engagement of 4 to 6 weeks and move on to another area. We became aware that some of the groups would break up or lose one of their members after performing in one of his clubs, and the dropout was always of the female gender. So about 6 months ago, the Montreal Vice Squad raided a very plush house of prostitution, where all the girls were found to be former nightclub entertainers who had worked for him. "You see," George continued, "those girls would never have found themselves in the situation they were in if they had not agreed to be hypnotized by someone. That person can never, from then on, resist the hypnotist's power." He then made a statement that was to stay with me forever. "Post-hypnotic suggestions," said George, "are carried out in an individual's life by the power of a spirit, in reality possessing and controlling that person's mind, and thereby a great many of the actions of one's life." I was in the front seat with George, and as he was telling us that, I must have had a look of disbelief on my face, because he looked at me and said, "You don't seem to believe me, Roger, but what I'm telling you is factual in the smallest detail. I'm not talking about kid stuff, it's serious business. A spirit can actually cause a person to perform certain actions in one's conduct with great enjoyment, that in times past he or she would have turned away from with horror." I was so impressed with what George was telling us, and greatly surprised over the revelation that demon spirits can control people through hypnotism, and the statement that so much good had been done for people through the practice of that science. "You are right," said George. "The spirits have benefited the lives of multitudes of people through that means, and in so doing have made them dependent on the continual support of the spirit's power, which will at the same time establish them as permanent members of the Master's kingdom." Boy, it sounds funny to hear some of this language being employed for demonic entities.
That's what the devil wants.
"It is wonderful that spirits can operate so effectively in the lives of millions without being detected. Therefore, it is very important that any hypnotist, that is, anyone having been benefited by the spirits and receiving that capacity, that gift, should use it with great discretion and avoid bringing disrepute upon that great gift. Let's see. The worship room of the gods. It was our third visit to a demon worshippers' assembly. This evening, said George, our leader, the satanic priest, will be present, having just returned from a trip to the States. He felt quite sure that the priest would look favorably upon us, and undoubtedly would have us visit the worship room of the gods. As we came in, we were introduced to a couple of people we had not met before, and then began to chat with a few people who came to wish us a good evening. Shortly after, the priest came in, and as he was shaking people's hands and speaking a few words to them, he slowly moved in our direction. As he reached us, George said, "Reverend, I would like you to meet a couple of fine gentlemen." And he introduced us. We chatted with the leader for a while, during which time he surprised us both by some of the things he said. For instance, when George mentioned about our having been in the Merchant Navy, the priest picked up the conversation and enlarged upon it by mentioning the names of the ships we had been on, plus a couple of details known only to us. I must admit it made quite an impression on us. He then excused himself, and as he did, mentioned that he would appreciate having a short talk with us before the evening was over. Not only were we impressed by what he said, but his very presence reflected an air of mystery. What's the matter?
No.
Okay. His piercing eyes, his bald head, his deep, low voice, accompanied by a few chuckles here and there as he talked, not to mention his physical frame, his size alone was impressive. To convey a picture of him, I would say he was in comparison equal in size to the late General Charles de Gaulle. After quite a lengthy testimonial session to the gods, the priest again joined us in a friendly conversation. He informed us that the spirits had acquainted him with much concerning us, and had manifested the desire to benefit our lives by bestowing great gifts upon us. When most people had left, he invited us to visit the worship room of the gods. To better understand the startling and almost shocking revelations that I was soon to receive, I feel it is necessary for me to tell of the mental image my Catholic upbringing had established concerning the devils and fallen angels. As a child, I was taught that the devil and his angels are in hell, in the Middle Earth, attending to the never-ending task of imposing various types of torture upon the souls of people that had died in a state of mortal sin. Demons were represented to us children as being half human, half animal, having horns and hooves and breathing out fire. As I came into my teens, I reasoned the whole idea was so ridiculous that most likely it was the invention of some overactive mind from centuries past, wanting to exploit the superstitious and the uneducated. I questioned the existence of such beings as the devil and his angels. So we proceeded downstairs to a very large room, beautifully furnished, undoubtedly the work of highly skilled interior designers and decorators. From the carpeting that pampered one's feet to the soft, piped-in music that captivated the ear, all was intended to fascinate the senses. But above all was the attention-getting. I believe that the abundance of beautiful oil paintings arrested my attention the most. There must have been about 75 paintings, around 48 by 30 inches in dimension, hung on the walls. The satanic priest mentioned if we had any questions, he would be happy to answer. So I said, "Who are the noble-looking individuals portrayed in the paintings?" He said, "Those noble-looking beings are the gods you have heard folks talk about in testimonial sessions. They are chief counselors ruling over legions of spirits. They have materialized, were photographed, and then we have paintings made of them. They are deserving of great honor. That is why, right below each painting, there is a small altar, making it possible for people in their devotions to burn candles, incense, and perform rituals as requested by the spirits." Beginning to think this is getting crazier as you read it. As we moved slowly along, we came to an altar upon which stood a staff with a serpent coiled around it made of brass. The priest made mention that the altar was dedicated to the god Nehushtan, whose power was so wonderfully put to work through the physician whose testimony we had heard earlier. Another comment made by the priest that didn't impress me much at the time, but took on greater meaning as I became a Bible student, was that great miracles were performed by the god of brass for the children of Israel when they burned incense before the brazen serpent that Moses had made a few centuries earlier. At the end of the room was a very large altar with a life-sized painting of a majestic-looking person above it. My friend inquired, "Who is this altar dedicated to?" And the priest replied, "It is dedicated to the master of us all." Then I said, "Well, what do you call him?" His face took on an expression of pride as he said, "God with us." So there they're taking the very name that was attributed to Jesus, giving it to the name of Satan.
That
He
was
had referred to the fallen Lucifer. Today, as I recall that painting to mind, having stood there many times admiring it over a period of 3 months, I must say the individual portrayed there had features that reflected a superior intellect. A high forehead, piercing eyes, the way he stood, that posture gave the impression of being a person of action, possessing the dignity of a great general. The answer of the satanic priest to my question was not what I had expected, and it was not really clear. Thoughts entered my mind. Surely he couldn't be referring to Christ Jesus. No, it couldn't be. But could it be that he's applying that name to the master of the demon spirits? Could it be? I believe that's what it means. So I asked him, "Do you mean to say this painting is a true image of Satan?" His reply was impressive. "Yes, it is, and you probably wonder where the hideous animal-like characteristics have gone." He chuckled and added in between the chuckles, "Pardon me for laughing a bit at this time. Please believe me, I am not laughing at you gentlemen over your bewildered state of mind. I am in reality delighted and amused at the thought the demon spirits have been so clever in concealing their true identity that even in this age of scientific advancement and great learning, a vast majority of Christians still believe in the horn and hoof theory." Then his facial expression changed to an air of deep concern as he said, "It is most solemnly important today that the up-and-coming generation be led to believe that the Master and his spirit associates don't really exist. For only in this way will they be able to rule the inhabitants of this planet successfully for the decades before us. Those will be the greatest in importance as pertaining to the history of man." Then his facial expression changed to a sense of confidence as he said, "Nothing is as intriguing to the spirits as to devise ways of causing humans to walk in a direction that will make them members of Satan's coming kingdom."
That's the plan.
We proceeded walking slowly, looking at various altars and paintings, with the high priest explaining to us that the demon spirits are in reality specialists in various fields of activity. They have a background of experiences that is measured in millenniums. They're engaged in a fierce conflict for the control of the minds of people against the forces from above. When asked by my friend why so much effort was being put forth by demon spirits in deceiving humans, a unique answer was given by the priest. He stated that everyone who can be made to disqualify himself from being a member of Christ's kingdom automatically becomes a member of Satan's great kingdom, which he will before long establish on the earth. Those that go down to the grave while being led by the spirit of Satan, he will someday restore to life. Christ and his followers, he said, intend to bring an end to the great conflict between the two great forces by raining fire from heaven upon us. But it will not hurt us because demon spirits are now able to control fire so it has no power to burn humans. And then he added, "If you doubt what I'm saying, go to India or other areas of the world where the black arts have been practiced to a science, and you will behold firewalkers stepping across a bed of fire without so much as singeing a hair of their legs." And as we left the worship room, I expressed the fact that in reality I was very confused regarding Satan and his angels, and I would appreciate additional information that could reinforce what then appeared to be a reality on the subject versus the teaching of my Catholic upbringing, that Satan and his angels are in hell with the souls of people that have died in the state of mortal sin. The satanic priest agreed to take time and give us what he called a true picture of things. He went at it in this manner. "Gentlemen, I realize your visiting our worship room has raised questions in your minds that need to be answered at once. First, let me tell you that we, the members of our secret society here in Montreal, are the elite of spirit worshippers. When the great conflict between the forces from above and the forces of our great master is over, and his kingdom is permanently established on our planet, we will be given positions of great authority and honor. We'll be richly rewarded for having sided willfully with what now appears to be the underdog, if you get what I mean. Our great master Satan, millenniums ago, had jurisdiction over countless numbers of beings in a vast universe. He became misunderstood and was forced to flee his domain along with other spirits who sympathized with him. The inhabitants of this planet welcomed our master with kind understanding, and because of his superior intellect, he was able to become the rightful possessor of the planet by causing the original owners to forfeit their right to it by believing something that he had said was not in reality factual. Some people call this deception, but in reality it is following the law of self-survival, which is the natural instinct in all great leaders. After it became known that the great rival Christ would come to this planet, taking the nature of man and draw all men to himself, our master and his chief counselors decided to follow a strategy similar to the one that enabled them to acquire their new dominion. This would demand great diligence on the part of all demon spirits in the counseling of humans to rule their lives in a way to disqualify them from ever becoming members of Christ's kingdom. The Spirit's work would be to cause people to rule their lives by listening to their feelings instead of to the words of Christ and his prophets. In no surer way could demon spirits obtain control of people's lives without individuals realizing that it is so. In this way, all kinds of erroneous doctrines and ideas could be suggested by spirits, and humans would readily accept them because they felt strongly about them, regardless of what others would say about it. By then it became clear to me that my whole ancestry had been victimized by heartless beings. The high priest, with his face radiating a sense of great fascination concerning what he had just told us, asked for the permission to take a few additional minutes of our time to illustrate what he had talked about. Having assured him of our deep interest in what he had just brought to our attention and our desire to know more of the activities of demon spirits, he continued his discourse. And we're coming to a place now where it's getting close to time up. Actually, one more page?
Is that a good, you done with that chapter?
No. These chapters are all kind of long. He says, if you recall, gentlemen, Solomon, the king of Israel, was gifted with great wisdom and arrested the attention of all the great rulers of earth. At the same time, our great master became very concerned over Solomon getting all that attention and decided a supreme effort should be made to control the entire world. Up to then, he had succeeded in establishing idolatry. Excuse me. Knew that was coming. He established idolatry in every part of the world except for in the nation of Israel. So it was decided that certain evil counselors, or evil spirits, would apply their efforts to first cause Solomon to think highly of himself. Secondly, he should be made to feel strongly that it would be in the best interest of the nation to form alliances with the surrounding heathen nations, even though many of the elders of his nation would advise him not to do so. No use saying any more, but that our master's plan was a huge success. And when the day came that by Solomon's example the children of Israel were led to worship Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the children of Ammon, names that I would recognize in the not-too-distant future as I read in the Bible in 1 Kings 11, when they prostrated themselves before idols representing demon spirits, our master felt that his triumph was complete. He had reached his great objective, and the whole world was in reality at his command. Gentlemen, I believe that by now you realize the master's great wisdom and cleverness in concealing his true identity, and thus assure himself and his dedicated agents that their diligence will be rewarded someday in seeing the generations of earth standing before them in humble obedience, acknowledging that their master is in reality God.
Let's stop it right there. And I don't even know where to start with us. So much there that there's of course a whole movement and an understanding out there today that there really is no such thing as an evil angel. Lucifer wasn't an evil angel.
Well, many of the world's religions have a pantheon of gods, and Lucifer, in various names, is actually considered one of the original gods.
What's fascinating, of course, what he's experiencing firsthand is to see how no matter how clear the Bible is, people can flip it around and call good bad and bad good. And it's just amazing.
They do that now.
Yeah, it's just amazing because really when you consider some of the people that get wrapped up in this kind of thing, spiritualism, you would think, how can that person fall for a fairy tale like that? I mean, these are college professors and people that have a lot of, PhDs and smart people, others as well. But I mean, you have a lot of academia wrapped up in this kind of thing. What do you think the reason for that is? What's the draw? What's the motive
I
behind all
think
that?
that's the way they just want it to be.
Well,
They want to
you
be
heard me
looked
make
up to.
a comment when I said that's a lie. When Rose was saying, they go here and their goal is never to take advantage of anybody, right? That is exactly the goal, right? It's so it's a self-centered concept to take advantage, not only to take advantage, but to step on as many people as you can to keep exalting yourself to where you ultimately want to go. And that's why a lot of the elite, are into this kind of thing, because they have an advantage in using supernatural capacities and capabilities to get where they want to get to. Okay?
Simeon sent a message. I think it is interesting that he talks about demons coming out of nowhere. They have to show themselves to us.
It's just amazing to me how people can get wrapped up in this kind of thing.
But most of the world doesn't believe that the story of Satan is true.
Right.
And then there's a lot of them that believe that this stuff is innocent. That,
Sure.
that believe that witchcraft and sorcery and all of these
Right.
things
The whole
are
Ouija
good
board
forces.
thing,
Yeah.
and telling people.
They don't realize how organized this other side
Yeah, I don't know
is.
if you picked up the other thing that seemed obvious to me, and that was, we're on the side of good, and our master wants to set up his kingdom on this earth, right? And of course, Christ is the Messiah, has been the one that's been the one that's trying the rival, the one that's trying to infiltrate and take from his kingdom, right? And it's just interesting how they're talking about, at some point, my master, say he's going to set up his kingdom here on earth. Well, isn't that exactly what the Christians, the Pentecostals, end up teaching? That Messiah's going to come and set up his kingdom on this earth. Well, who's already here? Satan is already here. All he has to do is kind of masquerade or do a scheme to pretend to be Messiah, set up his kingdom, and he's got all of the, quote, Christians right there at his beck and call, thinking this is exactly what was supposed to happen, and yet they've been deceived. Right? When Jesus comes the second time, does he ever come down to this earth?
No.
You see, Satan will not be allowed to counterfeit the second coming of Christ. So when you see a personation, when you see an exact replica of what we talked about last week, become reality. A being with white hair and eyes of flame of fire, and feet of brass and this kind of thing. When you see that happen, it's going to be almost an overwhelming deception. And it's one that many Christians are anticipating. They're expecting, they're hoping for, they're praying for it. And so when it happens, and he's walking around down here, and a small group of people realize what? This is a counterfeit. This is a false Messiah.
Right.
And so when you go telling the entire world that this is a deception, they're going to welcome you with open arms, right?
Well, what's going to happen, he's going to be able to perform such miracles in front of them that they'll believe every bit of it.
Exactly. They just sucked right into the whole
Do
scheme.
you know something that most Christians aren't aware of is that these satanic agencies, those involved in witchcraft and the New Age movement, have begun to co-opt Christian language.
Right.
And so you will get together with people and they will talk about offering prayer, but it's a different thing than what we traditionally think of. It sounds like our language, like our church speak, and it's really not. they're referring to whatever spirits that they're connected with.
Talking to the divine. They say.
Yes.
And even taking it even a step further, obviously, God has his representatives here on the planet still. They become a prime target, right? And so how do you end up turning them? How do you end up getting hold of their hearts and minds when they have a knowledge of the true second coming and things of that nature that would automatically set them apart from a false Messiah? How do you get them? Well, you start to educate their ministers. You infiltrate at the level of academia, and you begin to, over time, educate the young men and women that come through there that will eventually stand in the pulpits and teach the people and instruct the people. And of course, this has also been ongoing for the last probably 30, 40 years pretty significantly with the teachings of Ignatius Loyola, which have been promoted and taught, through many universities that are supposedly there to promote truth and so forth, and yet they've been turned, right? They've been compromised. And this is something that shouldn't shock anybody. This is what should be expected, because we're in a warfare. And so if the enemy can go behind can go behind the lines, so to speak, and program, young minds that, I call minds full of mush, mold them and make them into people that come out and teach error, and program people to compromise their faith. And the whole time, usually, like Rose said, this Christian speak, have contemplative prayer, and, have a centering prayer, and what's wrong with going through a spiritual, labyrinth, that kind of thing. So, you get into the whole spiritual disciplines of Ignatius Loyola, who was the epitome of a salvations by works aspect. In other words, I can save myself. I don't need the Holy Spirit. I don't need the oil in my lamp. I can be my own lamp. And so you have the whole Matthew 25, foolish and wise virgins playing out. It's exactly what we were told would happen just before Jesus comes. Okay? So
But the only way you're going to recognize which spirit is controlling the people that you encounter in the day-to-day is going to be through understanding what's in the Bible.
Right.
Because like he said, they control the world through their feelings.
Sure.
And, I'm noticing in the interactions online, I'm watching people responding to things. And I noticed, there were a couple of people that when something good happened to someone else, they would say, "Thank Goddess." Instead of "thank goodness" or "thank God," they had this "thank Goddess," that's their little expression. Or "wishing you love and light." Now that sounds very nice, very friendly.
Well, it is nice and friendly, and in its purest form.
Right. But people don't realize that they're using these buzz phrases that to us mean one thing, to the satanic side means something different. And so a lot of times we will hear people talking what sounds like Christian language and assume that they are Christians. And the reality is they're following the other side.
Yeah, the only thing that's going to get anybody through all the way to the end is going to be a reliance not on self, but on Spirit of God, okay, on what God can do and what He's done, etc., willing to do for us. The other side is total dependence on self and supernatural, and the evil supernatural aspects. Will help you along. So there's going to be this great divide as we go toward the end of time, and you have this huge multitude, and that's what Satan is counting on. He's counting on the multitudes to be so overwhelming that peer pressure even plays a part in saying, if everybody's going this way, I don't want to be the odd man out. I don't want to be the one that's going the other way. How can I be right if millions of people are going that way? That's really a lot of pressure. So you have to be the right kind of person, and God will choose. He knows who the right kind of people will be that will be able to stand separate from the direction that the multitude is going to be taking. And Jesus said it best. He said, the broad way is going to destruction. The narrow road is straight, but there'll be few on it. You know.
I don't know if I agree completely with God choosing who will be able to stand. I think that we have to choose to be the kind of people who would stand and pray for His strength to do it.
Yeah, because God always gives us our freedom of choice.
Right.
Well, there's
He
no
wants
question.
everyone
I'm thinking
to
of
be with Him.
right. Well, when I say God will choose, I'm referring to an example like the story of Gideon. Even though the 300, they made the decision to go through without laying aside their stuff and lapping up water. They walk through, and so that was the distinction, their choice. But it was God who really inspired them to do that. That's what I really meant to say. So the those at the end that will live through will be just like those in Gideon's group. They will recognize. In fact, Ellen White makes a statement. She says they went through the river in anticipation of an immediate advance upon the enemy. So they had the perspective that this is a warfare, and this is why we're here. This is why we are part of this army.
They also expected it to be imminent.
Yeah, that's what I just said. An immediate advance on the enemy is what they were anticipating. And
Sorry.
anyway,
I
okay.
knew what you said by immediate, but I'm saying we have this belief that was just removed from the statement of beliefs of Seventh-day Adventists.
Right.
We no longer believe in the imminent return.
Well, the way I look at it, if I can't look up and see Him, I'm not gonna
Look
go
down.
for this thing. He's in the desert, or He's
Sure.
in the holy
Exactly.
place.
Yeah, and of course, as Rose just stated there, it's what I would expect. It would be the direction I would expect the enemy to take the corporation to remove these waymarks
Standards of belief.
of understanding that the time is of the essence, and probationary time is fleeting very quickly. And I would expect the corporation to move away from, or be motivated to move away from that agenda. But those that are faithful will give the trumpet a certain sound, and that sound will be a warning of approaching doom.
We're still in chapter 1, or did we finish now?
We are in chapter 1, Revelation. And you can see I've got the board out. I've written some things on the board there. Last week we chatted about the being, the man, the Messiah in the midst of the lampstands. And of course, we all know who that is, right? That's Jesus. Jesus is the lamb in the midst of the lampstands. He's the one that specifically wanted to get John's attention, and he did. And John then not only hears his voice and then he turns to see him, but when he sees him, what does he see? He sees this being that is completely different, more of a glorified being than the person that he fellowshiped with and sat, at his knee learning and being taught, etc.
Yeah, but he did know him because he had seen him like that before.
I
At
think,
the
yes.
Transfiguration.
I think that you're absolutely correct with that. And so what we wanted to do in the way of starting today, I wanted to review just very quickly what was the purpose of John, why did Jesus want John to see him in that condition? There was a reason, right? There was a reason. Remember, the context of the book establishes the fact that this is a revelation of who?
Jesus
This is a making known of who? A revealing of who and what? Right? Of Jesus and his mission. And so, when we look at his description, what we want to do is we want to just summarize. What is the head and the hair? What did we talk about that? What one word did we use for that? Remember? Head and hair is white like wool.
Purity,
Purity,
holiness.
right? So, so we put that down. Eyes, the flame of fire. What do we talk about? He had eyes of flame of fire. When you think of that kind of thing, what's the word that we
Passion?
is the word passion, right? And what is passion? What does that mean?
Mercy.
Let me share with you a comment here. I'll kind of go back and forth here.
Passion be love.
It says, in the days of the apostles, the Christian believers were filled. This is out of Acts of the Apostles, all these quotations are. In the days of the apostles, the Christian believers were filled with earnestness and enthusiasm. Okay? They had real passion. I mean, that would describe what passion is. Earnestness and enthusiasm. So untiringly did they labor for their master that in a comparatively short time, notwithstanding fierce opposition, the gospel of the kingdom was sounded to all the inhabited parts of the earth. Wow. Then with that statement, you should be automatically asking, well, then why didn't Jesus come then? I mean, that right there was a fulfillment of Matthew 24:14, right? When this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness, then Jesus will come. Why didn't he come then? I mean, right there. I mean, they had so much passion, right, that they took the gospel to all the inhabited parts of the world.
Known world.
Yeah. Why didn't Jesus come? First century, man, could all have been over with then.
Well, no, he couldn't.
It's because
No, he couldn't have come in
why?
because
Because of why?
it's not on his timetable.
Just because of
He's
this.
got a schedule, a timetable.
Because of that,
Uh-huh.
right?
It's got to, yes.
Because of that, right there.
Nothing, it can't be undone. Nothing can be modified or changed.
In other words, the blueprint was established.
It's not going to change. It cannot be changed.
Fulfilled.
All right. So anyway, they had purity, they had passion, and of course, in the first century, we see that passion enabled them, that earnestness, right, and passion enabled them to they were so excited about what they were learning. And of course, Jesus was right with them. So I mean, there's really some motivation there to get excited about this, what he had come to do. I mean, as he's laying out, he kept saying, "My kingdom is not of this world," right? So, but yet, what does Christianity say today? Oh yeah, Jesus is going to come and set up his kingdom here when he comes, and it's not quite going to play out that way, is it?
It will at the third coming.
Eventually, but that's after a 1,000-year millennial period. All right, so what else do we have in the way of his description?
But back up a minute.
No, let's back up.
People actually think that he is going to be here, and this 1,000 years is going to be here,
Right.
and he's
right.
setting up the kingdom here.
And that's just what Rose was reading earlier in the story. That's what I was picking up in the story. That is Satan's plan. Satan's plan obviously is this: eliminate all of the resistance. See, we're all part of really the resistance, right?
Yep.
But eliminate the resistance, and what are you left with? You're left to do whatever you want to do. Okay? And that's been his plan all along. Eliminate the truth of the gospel. Eliminate, God's blueprint concept. And then I can do what I want. And if God were to come and try to force his way into the equation, then who becomes the bad guy? Then he becomes the bad guy in a sense, right? So that's why people don't recognize how severe it's going to be through the time of trouble and the plagues and so forth, because Satan is his solemn goal, his number one perspective and goal is to eliminate any of the resistance.
Well, and self-preservation.
Self-preservation is at play. Okay, feet like brass. What's the word we use for that? You remember?
Bronze.
Durability.
Durability. It'll enable you to go the distance. How about Jesus? Jesus was pure, right? Jesus had plenty of passion. He was going to go the distance, right? I mean, he was we don't really realize, because we weren't there personally, we only get little glimpses in the Bible through the Gospels of how every day he was being dogged, he was being hunted, he was being harassed. In fact, there were some cases where they were going to, Satan motivated them to stone him and to get rid of him, and he had to miraculously make his way of escape on several occasions. Right?
Yeah.
It was only at the appropriate time, when it was scheduled on the blueprint, that the Son of God allowed himself to be taken and abused and then eventually crucified. And then, of course, even in that, he yielded up his life. Nobody took it. He yielded it at the appropriate scheduled moment. Right? Okay, but he was durable. He had that durability. Feet like brass. What was the other thing? What about the many waters? Remember we talked about in there, that description? What did it say?
Voice of many waters.
Yeah. His voice like the sound of many waters. Just try to imagine yourself at the beach and the waves rolling in. That sound, that thundering sound of the waves hitting the shoreline there. Remember the word that we used?
Powerful?
Powerful, but he speaks with authority, right?
Yeah, speak with
He
authority.
speaks with authority.
What'd you do, write all that stuff down?
Somebody must have been paying attention last week.
Or
That's all I
wrote
was-
it down, one or two?
Okay, how about the next thing there? He's got something in his right hand. What's he got in his right hand?
Stars, 7 stars.
He's got 7 stars in his right hand. Well, why does he have 7 stars in his right hand? Why doesn't he have, 3 stars in his right hand and 2 in his left hand and maybe 2 in his pocket up here? Why didn't he have, 2 in his couple in his back pocket? Why has he got them all in his right hand?
Because that is the dominant hand, it's power and authority.
Power and
He
authority.
has control.
Yeah. But it also designates something else, right? You got a number of stars, right? What happens if you have some here in this hand, some in this hand, some in your back pocket? They're kind of scattered, right? Well, what does it indicate when he's got them all right in his right hand? They're together, right? So it's unity, right? It's unity that's being presented there. And he's in the midst of, but he's not only in the midst of these, he's got them, he's got a hold of them. And so they're unified, right? They're unified. And what's the last thing we looked at there? He's got a
Two-edged sword?
two-edged sword coming out of his mouth. What did we talk about that there?
Judgment?
Judgment or discernment? Yeah?
His
Now, what
voice,
is a
his,
two-edged sword?
Did you even
his
say that?
voice was like a 2-edged sword.
Now, what is the two-edged sword?
The word of the Lord.
And more,
Yeah.
well, actually,
That's Hebrews
this
4.
two-edged sword is also the same thing as the 2 witnesses. And this two-edged sword is God's holy word and the Holy Spirit.
Convicted.
That's what they're going to be.
Yeah, that's the oil in the lamp, right?
Right. See, and that's what Dawes is talking about. He's in the midst of.
He's in the midst of.
So you got the oil and the lamp.
So now, as John is seeing all of this, as John is seeing this person, as John is seeing his friend Messiah, he notices all these things, and we've kind of given him defined them, summarized them with a word here, and it says that his countenance shone like the sun, right? The sun. Well, that description was not only relevant to what Jesus would have to have as a person, right? But that description was also relevant for those who will live through to the end. Because remember, the book of Revelation is about the ultimates. You've got many applications, right? But then you have the ultimate fulfillment. And the ultimate fulfillment at the end, Jesus will come, but when he comes, so when you look up 1 John 3 in verse 2. 1 John 3 in verse 2.
But in the end times, you can apply this same thing right here to the 144,000.
That's exactly where I was going.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're
You're a
right,
little slow, but okay.
you're right in line there. And I appreciate you dragging it right out of me.
Okay.
So, those at the end will have to shine like the SON,
Yes.
okay? And they'll have to have the same characteristics that were displayed here. Purity, passion, durability, authority, unity, and discernment. Even though God's people will be scattered all around the planet,
And I'm not so sure this is just only going to apply to the 144,000. I think it's also going to apply to some of the martyrs and stuff that's going to die beforehand
sure.
and everything. But in other words, it's going to be the ones that are following Christ is who this will apply to.
Yeah, I think, I agree with you, but I think more specifically to those that are sealed.
That's what I mean.
And the ones that were sealed are gonna have to have each of these characteristics in their own personal lives as well. So,
Well, if you don't have the Son, you ain't going to make it. If you don't have these qualifications, you can't have the Son. So,
okay, so I'm gonna just take this off for a minute.
I'm just saying, we're gonna have 7 churches at the
no.
end of time.
And-
America, it says
and I hope you
7
noticed-
stars are the angels of the 7 churches.
How many of you,
And the candlesticks are the 7 churches.
yeah, how many of you noticed that was a 6-to-1 ratio there? Six characteristics there, all representing the countenance of Jesus and all representing the character of the end time believers. Okay, so it was a 6-to-1 ratio, another 6-to-1 ratio. Let's come back to our next verse there.
But wasn't Kenny asking something about the 7 churches?
Yeah, that's exactly where we're going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just didn't want him to feel like he was being bypassed. Sometimes
Okay,
you get on
so
your train of thought, it's hard to get off.
okay, verse 19 there, it says, "Write the things which you have seen, the things which are, and the things which will take place after this." And so, if you were going to summarize that verse there, what would you say to John?
It's pretty succinct all by itself.
Summarize
Things
it.
you've seen,
Summarize
the things
it.
which are now and the things which will be later.
Summarize it in 3 words. It's the past, the present, and the future. Okay? This one verse here, really, when you look at it succinctly like that, it really is a statement that the entire that not just the information going to these 7 congregations is relevant, but it's going to be relevant for the entire period of probationary time that this planet's going to have, the entire cycle.
You also see a pattern of the past, present, future in these other verses. Verse 17, I am the first and the last,
Last.
that's past and that's future.
Right.
And
all
of course
it's
it's
the
present.
Trinity.
I am him that liveth and was
Was
dead
dead
and alive
and
forevermore.
alive
So you've got
Same
past, present,
thing.
future there.
Yeah.
And then the things which you've seen, the things which are, and the things, so you got past, present, future
Future,
there. It's
yeah.
like he was saying, I'm in charge of time.
Yeah. And see
Well,
that's
it's also the Trinity.
and see I'm glad that Rose brought that up, because that was my next thought I wanted to bring out, that no matter what the circumstances look like, and this is particularly important, will be important for those living through to the end. No matter what it looks like, no matter what the circumstance is, no matter where you find yourself, what degree of persecution you experience, etc., 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 you must keep in mind that God has it all in control.
Amen.
He's totally in control of the whole thing, past, present, future, the whole plan, the whole blueprint. He devised it from eternity past. It's playing out just as He indicated it would.
If you gone that far, you have nothing to worry about. It's all taken care of.
Right.
Plays out the way he said, because it's all wrote right here. He's got it wrote down.
He's got it
It's
written
also
down.
a
It's his.
But it's also a reminder that because he knows the end from the beginning, he's in control, and we can rest in trusting that.
Trust in that.
Because it's really hard when everything is swirling around you and everything's out of control and the things that you love and have worked for get taken away from you. It's very hard to feel like you're still hearing his voice and still walking in his ways. it's going to be a very confusing time for a lot of God's people. You know, the kind of persecution that's going to happen in the very end
Wait,
has not been since there was a nation. So
let me ask, Rose, why should it be confusing? We know the end of the story. Why should this, and we know, without a shadow of a doubt, we're going to lose all support, everything. So why should this be confusing to God's children?
I don't think it is going to necessarily be confusing to those of us who have studied. But how about those that are newcomers to the faith, those who have not had the time to get into the studies that we've gotten into? See, we have to know the Word well enough to be able to share it. And we may be put into situations where we're stuck with people that are newcomers. Not stuck with, but you know, we're in a place where we have all these newcomers who are going to have their faith totally unsettled by the attacks that Satan's going to put against them. So unless you have your mind fortified with what the truth is in Scripture, you can't be encouragement to somebody else. You have to know this is the way this was told, this is what the Bible said was going to happen. You know, we have to know that to be able to share it and impart it to somebody else.
Yeah, I think it's true what you're saying, Rose, and plus those that are teetering.
Yeah.
And the world is going to say, no, you come with us, and we're the few saying, no, go with God.
I think, too, that there was a reference that just as when Israel left Egypt, there were zealots.
Yeah.
There was a mixed multitude who left Egypt with them because they saw what was happening with the Hebrews' God, and they figured there was something important with that. They weren't converted to the truth, but they saw enough to feel like this was something they should be doing. So you had this group that came along out of Egypt with the Israelites who were a constant source of irritation and discouragement because they didn't have their faith rooted on
They was wanting to make their own God.
Right.
That's what they was, that group.
And
They
that
got
could
it
be
done.
part of why it took them 40 years to get there instead of just a few.
The whole
hearing that murmuring.
the whole generation had to
Yeah,
go.
exactly.
And when you think about that circumstance, there were babies, small children, that went into Kadesh Barnea the second time around, along with their with their parents that have grown up, and were born in that 40 years of wandering. So, same thing is true in the spiritual sense, like I was just saying, those that are new in the faith, babes in the faith. We're going to have to bring them along. We're going to have to encourage them.
The world has so indoctrined them that it's going to be difficult for them to truly leave the world. That's where the confusion.
Ellen White makes the statement, she says, you know, that there'll be numerous people that will have to grow up so quickly, spiritually speaking. They will not have had
They
the
will have to
time.
learn in weeks the things we've had years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Very quickly the things. So, and that means that just God's going to make it all very obvious.
Right.
Make it much more obvious. All right, so now John could have ended his comments there and just went right into what we call chapter 2 and getting into the detail, you know, going back and actually looking at each message to each church. But he doesn't do that. In verse 20, he comes back and he emphasizes the stars. He calls it a mystery, the mystery of the stars.
And actually, John doesn't do that. This is where
this is
Jesus says this to him,
right. The mystery of the stars,
which you saw in my right hand and
right
the seven
hand,
golden
and the
candlesticks.
lampstands. And of course, the stars are the angels of the churches, and the lampstands are the churches. So he comes back to emphasize this before he goes into the detail of the message concerning them. So what is it about these seven churches? We talked about in the past that there were more than 7 literal churches in that area, but these 7 were selected. John was told to send this information to these particular 7. So there's something special, something unique. There's a reason, obviously, why God is instructing him to do this. And of course, one of the statements we read last week was the names of the 7 churches are symbolic of the church in different periods of the Christian era. The names, era. Okay, the names are symbolic. The number 7 indicates completeness and is symbolic of the fact that the messages extend to the end of time. So with the number itself, That's why it couldn't have ended back in the 4th century. It had to run all the way, the blueprint had to be extended out to the full
7,000.
agendas. Over 6,000 years. In other words, the 6-to-1 ratio has to play out. Now, we can get pretty definite with the year. We can get pretty definite with calculating 6,000 years because we've already gone through over 5,000, right? We've already gone, way over 5,000 years, so we can look back and calculate. But why does Scripture say we can't be dogmatic about the year that it ends? What's the reason why we can't be dogmatic and run around and tell people, well, 2034, that's the
No
year?
one knows the time or the date.
Okay.
God himself.
Well,
Well, not only that, but people won't even start getting ready until 2033.
right. In other words, God
The latter
has,
half of 2030.
Yeah,
yeah, within the
The day
blueprint,
before the day.
within the blueprint, even though it may be scheduled to end
And he
then,
can cut it short.
within that, He is
You wanna cut it
taking the
short.
prerogative of cutting it short. Okay, and He does that for specific reasons. So
So even though we can know that the timeline
we
goes
can know the
out that
blueprint,
far,
but it's
we
only
know
His
what's going to happen
prerogative.
before that.
It's His prerogative alone.
it,
His
see
prerogative.
something on my church.
Okay.
Not to sidetrack too
See
much, but
something
a
on
while
my
back,
church.
Elza was
Look on
reading
my church.
to me an article about a theory that somebody had that the current calendar date we have is quite off, saying that the during one of the reigns of one of the Catholic, reigns, that they thought it would be more impressive to have started the reign on the 1000th year instead of
Right.
whatever year it should have been.
Right.
And so what they did was they just cut off a whole bunch of years and went straight to 1000, like a reset.
There are numerous theories out there as to where we are in time, and people try to go through all these convoluted calculations and so forth. And I've looked at a number of them, but really the only thing you really need to understand is that God set everything up on a 7 cycle. Okay, once you understand that, once that becomes clear to you in Scripture that everything is set up on a 7 cycle, you don't have to try to get into all of the details. It's like trying to see the forest for the trees, People get so wrapped up in the detail, and it's easy to miss something when you're trying to calculate various things, like time. But if you understand that we're looking at 6,000 years of probation, then you only really need one fixed event
Define your time.
to define the different eras of time, or what I call dispensations, but in other words, doesn't like that word, but that's used, it just means a period of time. And so you have 3 basic periods of time that the Bible that identifies. You have the Adamic, which was from Adam to Noah, and you have the Jewish, what I would call the Jewish, which began with Abraham, and then you have the Christian. And when did the Christian era of time begin?
34.
34 AD. So once you have that one fixed thing, and it's divided into 3, and each is going to get an equal 2,000-year period of probation, and it becomes just really simple math to define that. But at any rate, it says here that while the symbols used reveal the condition of the church at different periods in the history of the world. So it says the number 7 indicates completeness and is symbolic of the fact that the messages extend to the end of time, while the symbols used reveal the condition of the church at different periods in the history of this world. So just like we talked last week, these messages apply personally to your own personal
Okay,
process.
that's what I want to go to.
Okay.
Wait a minute now. Okay, we know that it applies to the churches at certain periods of time in history.
Right?
And we're up right now into Laodicea.
Correct.
All right, now, it also applies to us. Now, how does it apply to us?
There's 2 ways I can think of.
Okay, I can too.
Okay. One of them is personally in our own walk with the Lord. Your Christian experience starts off warm and on fire, and then it cools, and you have to be brought back to those foundational
You have
principles
to regain the passion.
to regain that
Regain the
passion you
passion.
had. But I also see it, for example, while this is 7 periods of time for the Christian church as a whole, I also see it as progression of truth that have been brought out, the various fundamental principles of truth have been unveiled along the way. You know, the early Christian church fell into all that paganism and all of the junk of the Middle Ages and all of that, and they had to be rescued and brought out of that. You know, the Reformation happened as part of that whole process of bringing those truths back to the forefront and rediscovering those things. So I see them as also waymarks that way, and maybe even denominationally.
Well,
You know, a denomination starts off just like our Christian experience, warm and on fire and moving forward, and then begins to cool as time goes on.
well, but you see, also in that point right there, we can be in any state of this at different times in our walk with Christ. Because we're going, sometimes we're on fire. Sometimes we're in brotherly love. Sometimes we're Laodicea. But we can be in any of those places at any time in our walk. We just bounce back and forth.
One of
I
the,
tend to think we more cycle. We
Yeah,
cycle. We
cycle
go through those cycles. We repeat, because you know we get to the place where we're so distracted and so busy we've forgotten
Right.
who we are.
Exactly.
And then he brings us back, and then we go through those cooling cycles, and we have to be brought back to the warmth again. I think it's not a criticism of what
No.
happens. I think it's just a statement of life has cycles. History repeats itself, and our lives, we go through these
It's
cycles
called
too.
sanctification.
who looked up 1 John 3 verse 2? Somebody looked that up?
You
Logic.
want me to read it?
Hell, he
Beloved-
didn't even mention it.
So you never said anything about it, did you?
Why, no?
Hey, rewind the tape.
I'm about to say,
Rewind the
Larry,
tape.
am I the only one listening today?
1 John 3:2.
First
Beloved-
Did you
I was-
hear it?
no, I didn't.
1 John 3:2.
Beloved-
I found myself chuckling, thinking, well, he's asking who looked it up. I don't remember him saying anything about
Why,
it.
no?
Yeah, he
We
did.
were so busy
He did.
thinking about what we wanted to talk about. We weren't listening.
Uh-oh.
Alice, he did.
Go ahead, beloved.
It says, Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is.
So when we talk about running a cycle individually, we need to be back to the place where we have that first love experience again. We've
Nothing
run.
will recreate that first love experience like losing everything and having no place to look but up.
So yeah, God is allowing the circumstances to come upon the world to bring His people to that place.
But what happens to cause you to lose that first love? Distractions.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But if you get rid of those-
You've spent all of this time studying and learning these new truths,
Yeah.
and you're so excited, and then life interrupts. You know, things
Or-
go on, and here come all these distractions and things for your time and attention.
And also, I have to say another thing is routine. When you look at the sanctuary process, how God gave that, illustrated His answer to the sin problem, and they began to put the sanctuary together. Well, after hundreds of years of going through this routine,
They'd seen it, heard it.
right, it just became old and it wasn't new and fresh and so forth.
A good example of that is Cain and Abel. They did this. They knew what they were doing on the sacrifices and stuff.
And they knew what
It
God
just got-
required.
yeah, and it just got to be a routine. And Cain says, "I'm gonna do it different this time."
That's what happened with
Yeah.
Aaron's sons in the priestly ministry, too.
Exactly.
They got
Taking things
careless.
for granted.
Well, I think that's where selfishness comes into play, and our focus shifts to self instead of staying
Yes.
with God. And I
But-
think that's the big problem.
But when you start telling God how you're gonna worship Him,
Yeah.
God is no longer God. You're now God.
Exactly, and
Very
that's
true.
the selfishness of it.
Go ahead and keep talking. I'm just gonna.
We're going to just stare at you back for a while.
Why don't you go ahead and write Ephesians up there, because I can see that one now. if Elijah can do it, I can.
Remember the statement. Remember here the names of the seven churches, symbolic of the church in different periods of Christian era, right? So we want to, before we actually get into the detail, which is chapter 2 and 3, we want to understand what the names mean. And So you're going to help me, right?
We're happy if we can. Like we're from the government, we're here to help you.
Here to help you. Now, we'll share different things about these places as we go through chapter 2 and 3. So we're not necessarily going to get into a lot of the detail there, but we want to see where the names take us.
I think it's interesting to use the analogy as we go through this, especially this book, is that this is a lot like looking at a diamond. You know, diamonds are cut, and they're cut so that it has all these different surfaces that are at angles to each other. And depending on which facet of that diamond you look at, you see light and color differently. You're still looking at the same stone, but you're seeing different things because you're looking at it from different angles and different refraction points. And I see this in Revelation. There are so many things, so many pieces of this that you can be looking at. And it's real easy for people to take a surface glance and read through this and say, okay, that's the story.
Mm-hmm.
But until you dig deeper and begin looking at different angles, like the words and the meanings and the time periods, you know, you really appreciate the beauty of this diamond that we're holding in the...
Okay. How many of you have ever listed the patriarchs as you read through Genesis? You know, you start with Adam, and then as you go through Scripture, you know, you got Adam, and then not Cain, the next oldest, but you got Seth, and then you got Enos and Mahalalel, right? You have these line of all the way down to Noah, right? When you understand what those names actually mean, it tells a story, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. This
No,
will
we
tell
don't know
you.
that. You haven't shown us.
Well, I think it was maybe a year or two ago, whatever, we looked at that at one point. But anyway, I believe this is the same kind of
It is.
thing. It's kind of an acronym, you know.
It's a story.
It's
Storyboard.
It's actually a story, right? So this is one of the reasons why these particular 7 church congregations were selected, I believe. Okay? All right, and what we're going to find out that this as well is set up on a 6-to-1 ratio. I don't know if we'll have time to get into it today, but we'll find out that this is also a 6-to-1 ratio. All right. All right. The first church, Ephesus. What does Ephesus mean? Can you tell me? Anybody know? Ephesus. What does that word actually mean? Nobody's even ever heard? What things have you heard? Even if you haven't really looked into it. Most people would come up with the Greek definition, and a lot of these are kind of Greek definitions. But how many of you heard that, let's see,
I don't have a meaning in my Strong's Concordance. Just says a native or inhabitants of Ephesus. Doesn't say
Right.
what it means.
yeah. How many of you have ever heard that the first church meaning is desirable? Nobody heard that?
Yeah, it's supposed to be the apple of his eye.
And this one says that
Desirable?
Ephesus comes from the word meaning permitted.
Right, right. Actually, that's actually what the word means, permitted. Right? But many people believe, well, Ephesus was, of course, a very incredible place, and it was it was called also the light of Asia. It was they had over 1 million inhabitants in the city. It was kind of a seaport city, very desirable place to live, and so a lot of people use the word desirable.
And one of the wickedest.
Yeah. And we'll bring out a lot more when we actually begin to study these things. But it actually means permitted. Now, Smyrna, right? That actually means myrrh. What's myrrh?
It's a perfume.
Okay, perfume is derived from myrrh, incense.
It's like
It's also used for medicinal
It's like a
purposes.
feeling of
Also-
euphoria.
It's an essential oil.
It's,
Right.
well, essential oil is made from it. It's a plant
Right.
substance. It's a resin.
It's a resin. Right. Okay.
Let's see, myrrh. Myrrh was a seasoning used for embalming too.
Like a spice, right?
Yeah, because they got that. It was going to do
That's what the
positive.
kings brought Jesus, I think, was some
Yeah.
myrrh
Exactly. When the wise men
when
came.
he was born.
Gold, frankincense, myrrh. Right? Makes it very good, Ken. All right, how about Pergamus? This is, you guys.
Any
will
relation to
find this
purgatory?
interesting. Pergamus, right? Now you gotta remember, Pergamus was an elevated city, right? And so one of the meanings is, you ever heard the word citadel? You know what a citadel is? You know, we got a college called Citadel, right? You know what a citadel is?
Is it like a fortress?
Yeah, it's like a fortress, a castle. It's a fortified part of a city even. It doesn't have to be a castle, but it's a fortified part of a town or a city. And of course, Pergamus was elevated, an elevated place. And so that gives you an advantage to have, to have fortification, etc. But the word actually also means what really fortifies, what's the fortification for society? What's the fortification that society is based on? Marriage. Marriage. And that's what the word Pergamus actually means, married. Okay?
Where did you find that? I just find elevation.
That's in there.
It's in the Bible, look it up.
Yeah, married.
No.
And Thyatira.
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 Everybody gets those extra R's in there.
Yeah. Because
The
we're
fourth church.
from the south, man.
Just count the fourth church.
Sacrifice or sacrificial offering. And there's a little variation in some of these, but the general consensus is what I'm giving you and what these are from different scholars. Sardis, right? Sardis actually means escape.
Isn't it also a precious stone? Or is it different spelling?
No, I think it is.
Yeah, escape. Philadelphia, as
Brotherly love.
brotherly love. Okay.
Sardis means red one, so it's probably a red stone.
Yeah, exactly. And Laodicea.
Cold. Lukewarm.
That's condition. That's characteristic.
Justice of the people.
Yeah.
Judgment.
Judgment, right. Or people in judgment.
It says it was a
That's
city of
definitely us.
Phrygia, situated on the river Lycus, not far from Colossae. It was destroyed by an earthquake in 66 AD and rebuilt by Marcus Aurelius. It was the seat of the Christian church. So Laodicea was a very important place in that generation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's only, which one is it? There's some really interesting things that we'll get into when we read
Where'd you find
through
it at?
these.
Strong Concordance.
Oh,
This is, I use the blueletterbible.org, and you can actually click on a verse, and when you're in that verse and you click on the little link for Strong's, it brings up all the numbers next to it for
You
Strong's
also read
Concordance, and you
this
can
is-
pull them up. It's my
Right.
go-to when it comes to study because I can't read. I got that book out one time and tried to look something up, and I can't read that print in that big book. So this is very handy for me.
Okay, these 7 congregations were selected for a reason, because of the meanings of their names, and this would be relevant particularly at the end of time. Okay, I don't think so much back in the first century when you got to remember when the messages went, all the messages went to every one of these places. And then ultimately they spread out to the rest of the churches in the area, and of course the rest of the world. They've come down to us as well. But what's the significance? Of course, 7 is a significant number. It's a number of completeness. But what's so important about these particular names now for us today? Okay? And remember again the context. Who is this a revelation of?
Jesus Christ.
Okay, this is the revelation of Jesus. This is the making known of Messiah and his mission, etc. When you look at these interesting names here, let me do it kind of in a story fashion if I can. And it also, I believe, corresponds to Proverbs 9. 1 to 6, which is the reason why I left these up here. These are the characteristics of the everlasting gospel that would go to the entire world. There's a connection between these two. These are the 7 pillars of the gospel message. These pertain more to Christ himself, who was who the book is really revealing, right? In terms of salvation, the Son of God would be permitted to come and to covenant, to have a contract with the Father. He would
He's
be
also
permitted.
the desire of ages, desire of nations.
He is the desire of ages, right? So he would be permitted to come and to do what he was going to do, right? And by consenting to do that and consenting to join with the Father in this plan to rescue humanity, it would become a very sweet savor to the Father. It would be a perfume, it would be a myrrh, right? And the way that this was going to be accomplished was a marriage was going to have to take place, right? And that marriage, in reality, played out at Calvary, where the sacrificial offering would end up taking place, right? And this sacrificial offering would be from his human nature and from his divine nature. And it would enable us to escape. It would accomplish the atonement and would enable humanity to escape from the persecution that would come. And because of our gratitude in what he had done, our hearts would be filled with brotherly love, which would be so necessary. I mean, this is just a glimpse. This brotherly love is a glimpse of would another brother give his life for another brother? That's real sacrifice and real love. Even somebody that they didn't like. It's one thing to give your life for somebody that is a friend, but would you give your life for an enemy? You see? So it's kind of interesting how it flows down, and then eventually there would be a people in judgment that would judge men and angels, through the millennial period, completing this 7,000-year cycle. Okay?
You can
So-
also see how the definition of their names corresponds to a need in that time frame. Now, Laodicea meaning a time of judgment, but what was the problem with Laodicea?
Lack of discernment.
They had lack of discernment. They
Right.
didn't understand the times they were
Couldn't
living
know
in.
how to judge.
Right.
But
So they needed discernment. So they needed, in order to have judgment, they had to have discernment. So this church will be given a special measure of discernment
right.
in the latter
But
days.
all of this is predicated upon all of this. In other
Right.
words, this doesn't even happen in the millennial period unless all of this takes place first.
They build on each other
Right.
like a foundation.
And actually, what you'll find as we go through chapters 2 and 3, what you'll find is that every aspect of the first 6 churches is bound up in the last one. Okay, I'll show you that specifically when in other words, when you look at the things that are revealed about the churches, each church specifically, you'll find out that they are all wrapped up into the last church, right?
It's like the sum of all the others.
And it's because of all of this that a people become qualified, or at least requested, to judge men and angels through the millennial period. These specific churches were selected to help us understand what Jesus would do in accomplishing salvation for us, right? And it's fascinating to me that God is so incredible the way He positions and puts all these things together. It's amazing. And of course, as we go into chapter 2 and 3, we'll start going through these more specifically, and you'll see it for yourself how they're all wrapped up into the last church. But it's what He's done. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing. Just these are the names.
Like one of our friends used to say in his messages, has it ever occurred to you that nothing ever occurs to
Occurred to
God?
Yeah.
There's no
exactly.
point at which he's saying, wow, look at that. I wonder what should do now.
Yeah.
He never has to do that. He can always see where it's going and what he needs to do with stay several jumps ahead.
So this is a good stopping point, and then next week we'll begin chapter 2. So just read through that, study through that, and we'll,
Pick up some commentaries and look through it.
yep, yep, and see what it says. But again, what we've done over the last 4 or 5 weeks is we're just setting the foundation. You know, we're setting the foundation. We're looking at things kind of in a broad perspective, and now we're going to start going into more of the detail. But you have to get these. You have to get certain principles and understandings. You have to lay that as the foundation
Well, you got to have something to build on.
to build on this, right? And again, we're staying with the first 6 chapters are all about revealing Christ and His mission. Okay, we can make applications of things and people in history, but ultimately it's about unmasking, unraveling, exposing, making known, uncovering,
Unpacking, as some people say now.
unpacking what the Messiah would be and do. And the result of that is chapter 7, the development of the 144,000. And this is the second time that that's happening. Okay? You'll see from the book of Revelation itself that Christ, when we study about the church of Philadelphia, that section there tells us that Christ was planning on coming right there. Okay? He was going to cut it short right there. But it didn't happen. And so we're coming around a second time. All right, so maybe we could get E, maybe you could go ahead and dismiss us in prayer, if you would.
Lord, thank you so much for this day that you've allowed us to come together as a little group in our home and to worship you and to read and study these things that you've left for us and these prophecies and these words. We ask that the more we get into them, the more understanding you would give us so that we could share it with others and understand ourselves the urgency of your soon return and understand our place and our mission that you have given us here in this place and time. Continue to give us insight and understanding so that we may be a blessing to others. And bless our time together as well. Help us to keep our minds fixed on you and your soon return, that we might not lose focus and go through these patterns of the 7 churches so drastically that we lose sight of what we're here for. This is my prayer in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen and amen. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your comments and questions, and thank you guys for joining us again as always. Hope to see you next week. Same
We
place,
had a lot of new
same
people
time.
today. We had someone with us from Sweden,
Wow.
had somebody from the UK,
And yeah, and
somebody
if
from
you
Woodbridge, Virginia. Someone
and
goes
if
to
you're
Virginia
tuning
for
in
us.
for the first time, I mean, we have resources and so forth available. We'd be happy to send you out some materials that you could share with others or take a look at yourself.
Free
So-
of charge.
Yeah, no cost to you. So just send us an email. We've got one of our-
family@homechurch.us is our email.
we've got DVDs on our Discovery series, and we have books that we've written on the Ark of the Covenant and so forth. And so just feel free to contact us. Be happy to correspond to you. But anyway, we'll see you next time. Same place, same time. God bless. Have a great week. Okay, we're out.
Did you stop recording yet?